Welcome to the Gentleman's Guide to Vampires, Gaming, Curseborne, all kinds of things. In this video, we're going to be talking about locations. Cities by night, accursed worlds, all kinds of places that we may wish to incorporate into our games. Now, this is based off of a question that was submitted to me. As always, the first videos I make are the ones that people are requesting. This is people who have backed The World Below for a physical copy via BackerKit, and I will keep hammering on about that you can still do so. You can still pre-order The World Below in a physical copy on BackerKit right now, and if you do so and send me proof to MatthewDawkins.com, I've got a contact email on there, you can request a video along with it. So you get a game and you get a video of your choice. And the question was, how do I go about designing a city by night? Now, I queried, do you mean how do I go about designing a book like Chicago by Night? Because that's a book I developed for Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition. And I also profiled various other domains in some depth in Let the Streets Run Red, Cults of the Blood Gods, Trails of Ash and Bone, and more. Or do you want advice on how to run a city in a game? And it was the second. So we'll get onto game design at another point if someone is interested in that. For the time being, what we're looking at is how do you introduce your setting to players in a modern horror role-playing game? And at first, this can often seem like a very simple proposition. I think there are go-tos. Of course, you can always resort, and there's nothing wrong with this at all, to using an existing City by Night sourcebook. If you're playing Vampire the Masquerade, for instance, going to Chicago by Night is a good place to start. And there's a whole load of other by night books that offer different flavors. And likewise, if you're playing in Curseborne, Curseborne has a lot of setting information in the core book. But I know because I wrote it, and that is there for you to use and incorporate either into your own cities or form your own city. Anyone who's been watching the actual plays I've been running of Curseborne will have picked up that I've been setting all of my games in the fictional Junction City in Iowa. Now, for those who aren't in the know, Junction City is a one-line reference in The Stand and Needful Things, novels by Stephen King. In The Stand, it's where the plague started. In Needful Things, it's the last place that Leland Gaunt visited before coming to Castle Rock. It's actually a different Junction City in each case, but it was a tribute to Stephen King to use Junction City because they're never really elaborated upon. And I've really found myself leaning more and more toward creating my own city from the building blocks up rather than planting games in existing cities. But I see the appeal of going for a New York or a London or a Paris or indeed any major city. It gives you a lot of tools to play with. So when I started thinking about this video and what I wanted to convey to people, the kind of advice I wanted to give, I realized this is actually quite a layered topic. There is more to it than just providing a full rundown of what you want in a setting. You need to approach it bit by bit, different angles. So right now we're going to look at theme and location, how the two tie together and how they can influence characters that might be there. This isn't just NPCs, this is also going to be your player characters too. Obviously, if we're playing Vampire in this edition, 5th edition, that's going to be storyteller characters, I think. I can't even remember what we called them now. And in Curseborne, it's SGC, story guide characters. But NPCs, nice catch-all term, you know what they mean. We call them supporting characters, and they came from, and I still like that term quite a lot. So, when I'm thinking of a location to set a game in, one of the first things I often do is think about where I live. Now, I think this is a common thing that a lot of GMs, storytellers, story guides go for, especially with their first games, because they want familiarity. And plus, there's that bonus novelty feeling that players can enjoy if they are from that location as well, where they recognize a street or they recognize a business and they see that something that is familiar to them has been subverted in some way. And again, I think this is a really good place to start, but not necessarily just to poke fun at your hometown, which you're going to have a mixture of love and cynicism towards. It's because you can use your hometown as a font of history and culture. What do I mean by that? Well, as an example, if I were to set a game in the city of Salisbury, which is where I happen to be in the UK, I would pick on some of Salisbury's most remarkable features to help define the tone of this city in this horror game. What are Salisbury's most remarked upon features? Well, we have a cathedral. Cathedral with the tallest spire in the UK, I'm given to understand. 123 something or other. You'll have to ask the Russians about that because they have that down pat. You also have Stonehenge. Stonehenge is a fairly significant historical monument, and it is right outside. I can pretty much see it from my door. You also have Old Sarum. Old Sarum is a hill fort. It is where the city used to be in, I guess, what you'd call the early Middle Ages or Dark Ages. And you have Salisbury Plain, a strong military presence. The plots of everything from V for Vendetta to James Herbert's The Fog start on Salisbury Plain with weapons tests that have gone wrong. So there we go. We've got a cathedral, we've got Stonehenge, we've got a old city in ruins, and we have Salisbury Plain with its fake villages, with its weapons testing, with it all kinds of secrecy going on there. Now, what does that tell us? Well, it tells us that this is a city of history. It tells us that there's going to be characters and influences here that go back quite some time. If we look at the cathedral and we're looking at this through the, let's say, the lens of Vampire the Masquerade, I think it would be a complete waste to either not have a vampire that makes their haven in the crypt beneath Salisbury Cathedral, or to have some kind of Inquisition presence based on faith there. When you have a cultural landmark like that, I think you kind of need to use it in your game because it has so much weight, so much resonance for the people who know it. Likewise, Stonehenge. There's nothing wrong with going a bit stereotypical here. Stonehenge, of course, was used for all number of purposes in history, many of which are no longer known. And of course, it was commonly attributed to Stonehenge that things like druidic sacrifices would take place there. Now, the truth of that is lost in the mist of time and is largely something told about druids and pagans that isn't necessarily true. But in our game, it can be. Because having a place with a gross and bloody history is a very good way of adding flavour. Now, whether there are existing characters that gravitate toward it, if this were, let's say, Vampire the Requiem, we could put Circle of the Crone there. If this were Curseborne, we could have it be a very important place for either one of the sorcerer families, or indeed a group, whether we're talking about the Keepers of the Broken Vine, or we could go for, an outcast family like the League of the Hidden Crossroads. Stonehenge represents something more than just a calendar and the ability to see when the spring or winter, spring equinox or whatever is there. It is a place of religious significance, but opposite to the cathedral, which represents a hard Christian faith. You have a more flexible pagan faith there. Plus, in Curseborne, a place of such spirituality is deeply useful for crafting a liminal space. This is a place where maybe you could actually step back into a historic epoch, or a place through which monsters from the past enter your world. Now, if we go to something like Old Sarum is the old city. It is more or less just ruins now on top of a hill. Of course, it was a man-made hill, so that it could oversee the land surrounding. Now, as it is only ruins, if you want it to stay that way in your modern game, you will basically use something like Old Sarum to say that there is a vampire sleeping underneath it, or it is a place that was abandoned because there was a demon summoned and bound underneath it, or that it was abandoned because the whole place was cursed and everyone who was dwelling there was coming down with plague, or something more mystical even than that. In Curseborne, again, you've got your liminal spaces. Maybe the place just got encroached upon so much by liminal space that it did become unlivable, that anyone who decided they would try would end up falling afoul of some hex or other, or becoming mutated, warped in some way, and that's why they abandoned Old Sarum to move down to the floodplain where Salisbury was ultimately built, despite the real reason, which is likely that they wanted to build their city a bit closer to one of the rivers, or, well, the 5 rivers that pass through it. So you have faith, you have history, now you've got Salisbury Plain, you've got conspiracy. This is always something interesting to add to a city because it's a more modern sense of danger, where you have military and government secrets, you've got secret weapons, you've got testing facilities, you have the kinds of things that a monster could escape from, you have the kinds of places people could be abducted and dragged to, you've got miles and miles of, according to the maps, empty space, because most maps aren't allowed to record on them what is taking place across most of Salisbury Plain. In our mundane world, it's going to be things like tank maneuvers. It is going to be weapons tests. There is an entire village that is there and has no one living in it and is just used for exercises, although occasionally you can visit as a tourist. And it was once inhabited, this place. So that is another wonderful little feature, an abandoned village. All the houses and stores and so on still stand, but these days there's no one there anymore. In a way, I feel like a place like Salisbury Plain, a military encampment, a vast one, is, well, it's not Area 51-like, but it's pretty close. This is the kind of place from which number stations could be pinging, and, you might be hearing strange signals picking them up, and they might be signaling to something that is going to approach, or indeed it might be summoning something there. But why do I focus on 4 cornerstones? Well, I do the same thing with Junction City. When I'm running a game of Curseborne and I'm running it in Junction City, I'm thinking, okay, so what is Junction City based on? I don't necessarily go to the same wells as Salisbury. I will look at things like, okay, Junction City is a culture city. You have 4 theatres in a 4-block radius. It's hardly London's West End, but 4 theatres that are constantly competing with each other. Therefore, there's some, they're trying to gross each other out. They're trying to push themselves beyond the limits of taste in order to attract crowds in what is a frankly strained market. So that means this city, which has got a rich cultural history of putting on great plays of everyone from Shakespeare to Brecht and Joe Orton to Noel Cowan, everyone in between, well, they have this bacchanalia taking place at the theatres in Junction City, and things are becoming more and more debauched, more and more attractive to the accursed, such as the Bathorites, to the Verari, to a lot of the hungry families, the Sphinx as well, the Primal, those families that like to push themselves to the limits and in fact maybe even want to see their curses on display. And beyond that, you have the fact that Junction City was historically a steel town, but then moved into timber. Timber has always been a presence in Junction City, going all the way back to the 19th century when it was founded, and fell off when steel was the big thing. But once again, timber is the main industry now. Steel is a wasteland. And so what that gives you is an industrial past for the city. It implies that at one point this place was richer, and now there are dilapidated areas, and they will often be in the outskirts. Again, much like Salisbury Plain, you've got these wide expanses of, well, seemingly nothing, but in fact what you've got are abandoned factories and refineries and tools and equipment, workshops, so much of it rusted. So many pits, so many just scrap heaps that for whatever reason the usual thieves don't creep into to steal, because when they do, they just vanish. What can you do with a place like that? Well, of course, there is, again, that almost cultural resonance that the people of Junction City are going to feel. Our city was great once, and here is where it was great, so there's going to be a nostalgia, a longing. But also, you're going to be looking at it from the perspective of, well, what is taking place in these between spaces now that no one is living there? How far do they extend? In Curseborne, those kinds of spaces are very significant to the game, because between spaces, liminal spaces, are where creatures creep in from the outside and where your characters, as well as any other, can get lost. So what may seem to you to just be a fenced off refinery is in fact many, many, many miles psychically of liminal space. You step into it, finding your way out again, it will require walking through a labyrinth of rusted metal and dealing with the unnatural inhabitants that have come to, I guess, repurpose the abandoned machinery that's there. And now this is something I didn't go into with Salisbury, but you've also in Junction City got the political side of things and how that influences a city, a domain. In Vampire the Masquerade, it would be a domain. Of course, you'd be looking at, let's say, what kind of characters are your vampires going to want to influence. Now, Vampire the Masquerade tends to avoid the kindred getting involved deeply with mortal politics. It's a good way to get found out. Because Curseborne doesn't have a masquerade dividing the accursed from humanity, it's more pragmatism, cynicism, delusion that is preventing anyone from ever really getting hold of the idea that curses are not only widespread but also magical. I think you can, and I certainly do with Junction City, try and imply a deep level of corruption throughout the state, and therefore, well, specifically in the city. Your mayor and your local congressman and so on may not actually be accursed themselves, but they can certainly be having their strings pulled, and that allows for one family to rise dominant. Now, what does that mean in Curseborne? That's a subject for another video in terms of Curseborne politics, but at its most basic level, it means that this family has greater access to do what they want. And so even if all you're focusing on is liminalities as territory, our family is safeguarding this one or is plucking the resources, the heirlooms from this place, having access to that easily corrupted authority, which again, I think what I do with Junction City is I like to make the sort of political dynasty of Junction City go back over 100 years. So it's the same crooked family in various iterations going back with very little change in party politics. Occasionally it might flip from Democrat to Republican, but wouldn't you know, the Republican is just a second cousin of the Democrat who was last present there. So there we have culture, we have history and industry, we have politics, and the last aspect of Junction City is the weird, the urban legends. And there are urban legends in cities like Salisbury as well. There are urban legends in New York, in London, and all the other cities I mentioned as well. But in Junction City, it's easier for me to come up with these things, of course, because it's fictional. And as an example, one that appeared in the Last Train actual play that I ran that's on this channel is the idea of a subway station. There's a very small or short metro in Junction City, but there is a subway station that was never opened. That when someone intended for it to be opened, it was a week before its grand opening, and then there was a horrible collapse. And 30 workers were buried alive in there. And all they could really do was unearth and then reroute the train tunnel, and then they never reopened that station again. But some people, when they're passing down the line, are sure that they see that station when they're passing by. Now, you can do any number of urban legends like that, and obviously every horror game you play is going to be playing with a lot of those kinds of things. But I think having a couple of central ones, the Great Collapse of 1952, when this subway station imploded on itself, has left a deep scar on the psyche of the people of Junction City. And this is the kind of story that children are going to grow up learning. Yes, there's going to be a lot of weirdness in the back alleys, in the stores no one visits, and all those kinds of places, but a disaster that affected so many people in the city is the kind of thing you're going to be raised on, tell nursery stories and rhymes about, and is also going to be the reason a lot of kids go missing, because they're going to want to explore the collapsed station, and I have no doubt that's the kind of thing that will fuel many a plot. So, anyway, when we talk about theme and location, I'm looking at the icons of a city that are going to impact the stories you tell and the locations you visit. You don't have to go to all of these places every single time, but the whole purpose of incorporating them, whether it's from your real city or a fictional city, is they give you some cornerstones, or touchstones if you prefer, that you can base some of the major events of your plot and your city around. I think it's very useful to do this, because even if you don't incorporate them every single time, you can tie big bads to them. You can tie smaller events to them. It gives you some major, I guess, keystones from which to... I've done cornerstones, touchstones, and keystones now, from which your plot can then unspool. Obviously, if you are setting a game in a city where you don't live, or it's not fictional, it's very easy to find this kind of information out. Hell, Wikipedia is your friend here. You want to find out about the history of a place, some of the major events that have taken place there. Usually disasters are very good, like if you're going for Chicago, the Great Fire of Chicago is a pretty good one. You can obviously look for some of the major figures, but let's not get onto characters properly, not just yet. We'll do that in another video. The next part, we'll look on persona, I guess, of a city. And what you're looking for is, and I do consider this a really interesting and vital part of knowing the shape, the face, the flavour of a city, is understanding the industry. I can look at Salisbury and say this is a military town, because it is. A great many of the people who live here either work for the military or worked for the military and are now retired. And that affects the flavour of the town, it affects the politics of a town. So likewise, if you have a steel town, a timber mill that is the major employer for a city, if you have a place that is on the coast as opposed to on the river or just inland, or if it's surrounded by farms, these all tell us something about the city in which you're playing. And as a story guide, they feed so many potential sources of information to us that should hopefully spark off lots of ideas for you to run your games. Now, so this is part one. We will go even further into how to develop your city. So do tune in for the next one, where we will look at the kinds of characters that inhabit a city and how to balance introducing an interesting cast of characters while not overwhelming yourself or your players. So I will see you next time. Thank you very much for watching.